Welcome to Crime Beat. I'm Anthony Robart. Tonight, when a man from a small town goes missing in the big city, questions swirl as to what could have happened.
He had gone to visit some friends, had left a message on the answering machine saying, "I'm out for the night," and that was the last thing anybody heard of him.
The owner had to go in to retrieve his dog, and he discovered quite a grisly scene.
And at that point, no one really knew what had happened.
Nope.
He was the victim of a murder.
Yeah, exactly.
Larry Arnold was a quiet, reserved man.
He's the exact opposite of a person that you would expect to become the victim of a violent homicide.
Little did investigators realize at the time, but the mystery of his disappearance is just the beginning of a cross-Canada effort to catch one of Canada's least known serial offenders.
It was unlike my sister to be late.
After midnight on the 8th of August, we responded to what at that time was a missing person.
There was a trail behind the mall, a shortcut to the direction of their homes. I said, well, I'll go take a look.
At 6:55, Eric finds Sarah's Walkman.
And then I actually did see her.
It was just the worst day of my life.
This is not the type of crime that typically would happen in the city of North Bay.
Here's Caryn Lieberman with Part 1 of Innocence and Evil.
For as far back as Joshua Hind can remember, Larry Arnold was a part of his life.
He was my Uncle Larry. He wasn't my uncle by blood, but he was my Uncle Larry. He's really the only uncle that I've ever really known. My mom has family, but they live in the States, and we didn't see them very often. And so he was family.
Which made it even more difficult to understand and accept that one day his beloved Uncle Larry had just vanished.
As far as I knew, he was just missing. I didn't know any more context to it than that. Getting picked up from, I don't know, from something at school or from Boy Scouts or something like that. But I remember it was dark, and I remember we were in the car. I'm pretty sure it was my mom told me that Uncle Larry was missing. And that was it. He was just missing.
Larry had gone to Toronto, about a 3-hour drive east from his hometown of Chatham, Ontario.
You know, he came to visit his friends in Toronto every once in a while and would bring us back, you know, whatever, like a CN Tower trinket or a postcard or something like that. There were entire aspects of his life that I had no idea about, nor should I have, right? I was just a kid. He was my Uncle Larry.
It was a trip he would take a few times a year, but he always returned. So when he didn't make it back after a weekend in the fall of 1994, his family worried.
He had gone to visit some friends, and he had been out for the night and had left a voicemail at his friend's house, or whatever, on the answering machine. I guess we're talking about the early 90s. Had left a message on the answering machine saying, I'm out for the night and I'll see you later. And that was the last thing anybody heard of him.
Joshua, his parents, Larry's sister were all desperate for answers. But he was in 9th grade and couldn't very well travel to Toronto to help with the search.
I was 14 years old. I didn't have any money. I didn't, how am I going to do these things, right?
But you were worried.
Of course, yeah. Well, he was missing and like in thin air. And of course you think, okay, well maybe he took it, I'm a kid. He took a trip, he was captured by aliens, he was like anything but he was killed.
As we started our initial investigation and some background, the first person we spoke to was the gentleman who had reported him missing, and from him came the story. And the story, as we started to learn, is that Larry was from Chatham, Ontario. Larry happened to be a gay man who would come to Toronto because in the description of his friend, there really wasn't a gay community where he could socialize in Chatham at that time, 1994. And of course, we had a very thriving cultural experience happening in the gay community in Toronto. So a lot of people would come from out of town for those reasons. And Larry was one of them.
A visit with a friend in the big city where he frequented the bars and cafes in the village. A shopping neighborhood by day, a bustling entertainment destination at night, the area is known as a welcoming place for members of the LGBTQ+ community. This trip in October of that year should have been no different than any other.
What Larry had done is he arrived as he normally would. He stayed with his good friend, and his good friend would go to work and say, you know, Larry, maybe we'll get together tonight for dinner and catch up. So when this gentleman got home, he noticed that A, Larry wasn't there, and B, that there was a voicemail for him, and he picked up the voicemail, and it in fact was Larry, his dear friend. And Larry said to him, look, I've met some people, I'm having a wonderful time. Let's do dinner another night, I'll see you later. And so his friend expected to see him home sometime that night.
He never turned up. Where had Larry Arnold gone?
I remember the night in the car when my mom told me. I remember the next couple of days feeling absolutely powerless and just wanting to find him. And then, you know, he was missing for weeks.
Disappeared without a trace from one of the busiest neighborhoods in the city.
It almost became part of our routine, just became part of like the background noise of our lives, that we were sort of stumbling through our lives waiting for him to like show up on the doorstep.
So with no sign of Larry for weeks, life kept going, but an important piece was missing.
I think it was probably in the paper, it might have been on the local TV news, and that was kind of it. And then it just sort of became a part of our lives, that we were living with this grief and this lack of knowledge and these questions. But there is always a part of you that just expects that a knock on the door and there they'll be, right? Oh, funny story. I went to Tahiti, or whatever the case may be. But of course that's, you know, that's rarely what happens. I think police will tell you that if they don't show up in the first day or so, you know, most of the time they show up in the first day or so.
And here days were passing.
And days and
no
weeks
information.
and no information and no nothing.
There were no clues as to where Larry Arnold had gone until one weekend in November.
It just so happened that on that weekend, my partner and I were called to 3 violent crime scenes. There was a lot of blood and a missing woman. And later on, within the hour, we were called to a very violent homicide where a man was stabbed like 50 times.
A rash of violent crimes in Toronto on an unseasonably warm weekend, recalls former homicide investigator Dave Perry.
Probably the nicest November 19th on record. My father and I were out golfing, and we're just wearing golf shirts. It was so beautiful and so warm. And about halfway through the round, my pager went off.
He found himself rushing from one crime scene to the next.
In one sort of day, on an off day, we're finding ourselves quite busy. Now, the good news is that we resolved the other 2 issues quite quickly.
Which left one open investigation.
The initial reports I got is that a body had been found in a ravine off of Mount Pleasant Road in Roxborough. So that's kind of all we knew. We also knew that the body wasn't in very good condition, which told us it had probably been there for a while.
An outdoor crime scene located in a busy area next to a popular Midtown walking trail.
There were all kinds of people that probably walked by this little patch of woods where the body was found. And there must have been hundreds of people a day that walked by there, and nobody had seen the body, and you wouldn't have unless you'd literally gone to that area.
Finally, someone had. A man was out walking with his dog when the dog wandered into the lightly wooded area and wouldn't come out.
So the owner had to go in to retrieve his dog, and he discovered quite a grisly scene, if you will. When we approached the scene, the first thing we noticed is that clearly the body had been there a very long time. It was very difficult for us to process because you really couldn't tell initially if it was a man or if it was a woman. There was advanced decomposition.
Coming up, Could this be Larry Arnold? That's after the break. Larry Arnold is known as a caring, generous man, an uncle figure in his late 40s from small-town Chatham, Ontario. But one weekend in October of 1994, he makes a trip to Toronto and hasn't been heard from since. Now, a decomposing body has been found in a ravine. Here's Caryn Lieberman with Innocence and Evil.
Like in every case, you look for just that first little break, and our first little break was upon examination of the body. We saw that there was a medic alert bracelet. So that was our first clue. We were able to make some quick inquiries through that alert and the serial number on the alert. And so within a very short period of time, we identified who this person was.
Larry Arnold was a quiet, reserved man. He lived in Chatham and worked at the same company for 25 years. Arnold's severely beaten body was found on Saturday in a Rosedale District park. The park is frequented by gay men for sexual encounters.
The who, we figured out quite easily. The when, because of the reporting, that came together quite quickly. But now we were six weeks behind with a highly contaminated outdoor crime scene. So we knew that this was going to be a challenge to figure out what happened to Mr. Arnold. He's the exact opposite of a person that you would expect to become the victim of a violent homicide.
Police searched the park for any evidence that could lead them to Arnold's killer. He was last seen October 14th in a gay bar in the Yonge and Wellesley area of downtown Toronto.
This time, the only information that we have is that he had possibly met someone at a bar in that area and that he may have left with them.
Larry's friend shared what little he knew about the night he had disappeared.
When this gentleman got home, he noticed that A, Larry wasn't there, and B, that there was a voicemail for him, and he picked up the voicemail, and it in fact was Larry, his dear friend. And Larry said to him, "Look, I've met some people, I'm having a wonderful time. Let's do dinner another night, I'll see you later." And so his friend expected to see him home sometime that night. His friend was able to tell us that it sounded like he was in a very noisy bar, and that was about it. That's where we had to start. Again, about 6-7 weeks behind the time of death.
Police are trying to trace Arnold's final movements, and they are appealing to Toronto's gay community for help. Anyone with information is asked to call the Homicide Squad or Crime Stoppers.
You'd learned that he had been found.
Yeah.
Do you remember how you felt?
What's interesting is I remember clearly my mom telling me that he was missing, but I don't remember being told that he was dead.
And at that point, no one really knew what had happened.
No, nope.
He was the victim of a murder.
Yeah, exactly. He was the victim of a murder, and that was it. And it had taken a long time to find him, and people had a lot of strong feelings about that. And whatever the details, the exact details are, I can only imagine that anytime someone goes missing for a long time, that it feels like not enough was done in order to find them, whether it was or not. But then we buried him.
And you're in Chatham.
We're in Chatham.
Investigations in Toronto.
Yep. And for me, as the kid in the situation, there wasn't much for me to do at all.
Just miss him.
Just miss him. Yeah, just think about him a lot and miss him and be confused by the whole thing.
Police have no motive for the murder, but some members of Toronto's gay community are convinced it was a hate crime.
People have been hurt there before, and it is known for that, and I think people go there to queer bash because they know there are gay people there for those reasons.
Oh, yeah, of course. It nearly happened to me twice last week. Just because I've got a big mustache, these guys, I was working elsewhere, and these guys in a bar decided that, hey, he's a let's beat him up.
It's really scary to come down here and think that anything can happen.
So we started to try and develop theories into how he became deceased and why in that ravine and so on. And as we spoke to many, many people, we found out that his last known location was a bar called Trax Bar on Yonge Street.
Do you think that he was targeted? Like in your mind, when you think about what happened to Uncle Larry, does it occur to you that it was possible?
He was in a gay bar called Trax, so I suppose that's where his killer went looking for someone. I imagine Larry was targeted because he was personable, because he spoke to this guy.
Investigators needed more than that. They needed to know who did it and why. Most importantly, with more than a month passed since Larry had gone missing, Dave Perry knew he had an uphill battle ahead of him in pursuing the killer.
The fact that he was visiting in a city and in a community that he wasn't a permanent resident in, therefore his social contact was quite small. So there were only so many people we could actually find that knew Larry on any level, even just to say, yes, I saw him. Yes, I had a drink with him.
We're talking about the 90s. Was there surveillance video as an example? This is a pretty popular club.
Yes, there, you know, and the problem was the number of weeks that had gone by. What little surveillance equipment that was available had long been erased. In those days, people, for example, used VHS tapes, would tape for 24 hours, rewind and tape all over again the next day, providing something didn't happen that would want them to hang on to that. So the technology wasn't there.
In the town of Chatham, Ontario, a funeral was held for a man who quietly touched the lives of many. A man whose life was cut brutally short.
Larry was very open with his heart. He gave it to, you know, he opened his heart and his home and his life to a couple of kids who were not his own and treated us as though we were, and he did that for other people. I remember my dad giving the eulogy. I remember just breaking down completely and staying that way for a long time and letting all those emotions out.
In Chatham, Larry lived a simple life. He was in his late 40s, had been working at a local truck plant for more than 20 years.
What did he like to do besides, you know, he sounds like he was a family man because he was your family man. What did he like to do?
He was very into style, and he was into design, and he was into art, and those were things that he and my mom connected on. And then he had other interests. He was into sports, and he was into other things, and that's what he and my dad connected on. Of course, they connected on work.
Uncle Larry was as close as any blood relative could be. Joshua bonded with him and looked up to him.
Larry got me interested in theater. He made me a cassette tape of Phantom of the Opera, and I wore that thing out. And then he made me one of Les Mis. For whatever reason, Phantom really resonated with me, and I wore that tape out. And that tape got me dreaming about theater. I've worked in theater or live entertainment ever since then, and it really all goes back to Uncle Larry and that cassette tape.
While family grieved in Chatham, in Toronto, investigators searched for clues.
There was an autopsy performed, and that's when we started to confirm and starting to understand the manner and the mechanism of death. And in Larry's case, he was essentially beaten to death, and he had two very significant injuries. One of them was he had a shattered jaw, and the other one was that he had a crushed skull. So his skull had been impacted with some kind of an object or whatever, so we knew that it was a beating. So we started to try and develop theories into how he became deceased and why in that ravine and so on. Because of the condition of the body, there was no DNA available to us whatsoever, like suspect DNA, suspect samples. Yeah, we were up against a wall on this one.
Retracing Larry's steps, the night he disappeared, Dave Perry found himself in Toronto's gay village.
It was the first time as an investigator that I had really had to fully immerse myself into the gay community and try and have a better understanding of what might have happened and how. And I can tell you this, to this day, I have never met a community or a cultural group or anybody that was more supportive than this particular group. In 1994, we got 100% cooperation. Everybody wanted to tell us anything and everything they knew about Larry Arnold, where he was, about the bar, and perhaps their own theories about what happened to him.
Did any of them have any knowledge of him with another person leaving that bar?
The way it was described to me, and I guess I confirm that just by spending a lot of time in that bar speaking to people, is that it was a gay bar that essentially for an older crowd. So the gentlemen that frequented that bar were a little older than some of the other bars that we may have gone into. But that made them, pay a little bit more attention and be even a tighter community in terms of looking after each other. So yeah, we had several witnesses come forward and tell us that this is what we believe. And we got ourselves to the point where we had several people talk about one person in particular that they only knew by a street name.
A profile of a possible suspect.
Coming up, what will police learn about the man they believe may have killed Larry Arnold? As police investigate the murder of Larry Arnold, last seen at a bar in Toronto's gay village, a profile of a possible suspect has started to emerge. Here's Caryn Lieberman with Innocence and Evil.
We believe that Larry Arnold was hustled in Trax Bar on Yonge Street on that particular day, and that he probably went out of the bar thinking he was going to have a relationship with somebody, and they ended up in this ravine, and that's where I think everything went wrong.
Larry Arnold was beaten to death. The killer still out there. At home in Chatham, Larry's loved ones waited for any news.
One day he's missing.
One day he's, yeah.
The next day you find out he's been murdered.
And we went through those phases of anger and sadness and all of that, and then it kind of settled in. And then months later he was found, and it all started again. Sadness and anger and feeling of helplessness.
Also difficult for the family, seeing Larry's personal life flashed across the headlines.
He's an admitted homosexual, and he frequented gay bars and restaurants in the area of Yonge and Wellesley.
Arnold's severely beaten body was found on Saturday in a Rosedale District park. The park is frequented by gay men for sexual encounters.
I mean, I remember finding out for the first time being told for the first time that he was gay, and I found out through the news. Not just Larry, my Uncle Larry, who I loved my whole life, was found and he has been brutally killed. Larry Arnold, a gay man from Chatham. I also remember my mom getting angry about how much attention it was getting.
That part of it.
That part of it, right? He kept his personal life to himself, and I can only imagine that was a necessity at the time. And then all of a sudden it was out. And if he had wanted everybody to know, I'm sure he would have told everybody.
For investigators, what made Larry vulnerable wasn't his sexuality.
Larry was vulnerable because of his nature, his wonderful, kind human nature, not for any other reason. Larry Arnold did nothing wrong. Larry Arnold did nothing that should have resulted in him being the victim of a violent crime or a homicide. He was simply engaged in social activity. He was simply being kind and talking to people that he met.
Who Larry had been talking to the night he was murdered was a mystery.
So you know who the victim is, and you know the terrible manner in which he died, but you have no suspect.
No suspect. Initially, not even a place to start, right? We just have the crime scene itself, an outdoor scene, but no place to start. Until we start reversing back, we poured through hundreds of occurrences, especially in that area, violent occurrences, seeing if we could just come up with a name or a suspect. And we interviewed a lot of people as a result of that work.
Most of them were cleared, but there was one description of a male suspect that piqued their interest.
The information that came is that he was a French Canadian, that he frequented this bar on a fairly regular basis, that people saw him as a bit of a hustler, that he would be in there hustling people, and not just for the relationship piece, but sometimes for cash, for money, these kinds of things.
At the time, no one besides Dave Perry and his partner knew about the robbery, an investigative tactic known as hold back information.
We didn't even present a theory to the media that would go anywhere in the direction of what we're talking about here, that the motive was robbery, and that the robbery went wrong, as they do many times, and it became even more violent than perhaps even the suspect intended it to be, but Larry ended up dead.
A robbery gone wrong. Taken were a number of Larry's belongings: a ring, his wallet and credit cards, and a brown leather jacket with big buttons down the front.
The fact that the killer had stolen from him always kind of felt like just an add-on to the story. I can't imagine that he lured him away from this bar and savagely beat him to death just to steal his leather jacket.
We tried our best to track down this French-Canadian suspect who we didn't have a name. And I will tell you that there was a point where we actually believed we had him, and we identified a subject that we believed to be this French-Canadian, and we brought him in. He was an interesting character for sure, had the criminal background and profile that would lead one to believe that he could be responsible for this kind of an act. He had a violent past.
But he was not the killer. A potential suspect cleared from the list.
And with the day we cleared him is the day we thought this case could go cold.
For you, it was that one case that hadn't been solved.
The one case that kept me awake at night and drove me crazy. It was the only unsolved homicide case I had when I left the homicide squad.
That must have been a horrible feeling.
It's the worst feeling, the absolute worst feeling. You know, especially when you get that connection with the family. If it was going to be solved, it was going to be solved by the community. When I left the homicide squad, I guess that's what I'd hoped for. I'd hoped that someday somebody would call in a tip, or somebody would be arrested and be compromised to the point where they would hand over that piece of information, that we would get a call and perhaps have a chance of solving the case. Quite frankly, I started wondering if the case would ever be solved.
I wonder also, given the nature of the injuries, how concerning it is for you knowing that the perpetrator's still out there.
Absolutely. You know, a violent homicide, and has it happened to somebody else? Is it going to happen to somebody else in the future? And I can tell you that was a big concern for us.
Coming up, years would pass, but the detectives' fears were about to come true. That's after the break. It's been almost 3 years since Larry Arnold's body was found in a Toronto ravine. And without any suspects, the case has gone cold. But in 1997, the horror was about to start all over. This time, for another family living a few hundred kilometers to the north. Here's Caryn Lieberman with Innocence and Evil.
If Sarah Whitehead was going to be late, she would always call home.
It was unlike my sister to be late. But back then, of course, no cell phones, you know, but she would have found a payphone if she was going to be late.
At 20 years old, Sarah lived with her parents and younger brother in North Bay. One day, in late summer 1997, Sarah went out and didn't return.
An hour goes by, no phone call. 2 hours go by, no phone call. So then I think my parents really started to get worried, because that was out of her element. Like, she would definitely have let them know if she was going to be running behind.
Sarah went to Northgate Mall, just a short walk from home, to buy a gift for her mother. Her birthday was coming up the following day.
You know, trying to call her friends, seeing if they've seen her, you know, no one's seen her. Then I think I remember my mother telling me, like, she knew something was wrong, like something bad was wrong, something happened.
What do you remember about, you know, that evening, the evening that she didn't come home?
Her boyfriend at the time worked at Walmart, and he had to work till 9, so she was just going to go back home, and he was going to go home and have a shower and then pick her up later. And So he phoned from his parents' place to say he was on his way, and my brother said, well, she hasn't came home yet. That kind of made them wonder, because she wasn't a kid that would not do something that she said she was going to do.
Sarah worked at a popular women's clothing store and attended university. She had big plans and was focusing on her future. She had just returned from a business trip earlier that evening.
And they were setting up a new store, and so she went down there for 3 days to help them set the store up, and then she came back on the Thursday evening. Yeah, she was a good kid. She had a goal in life, and she was on the right path, I thought.
She was, you know, a straight A student, very smart. Thank God, because I needed all the help. She helped me quite a bit. Yeah, very intelligent. She loved learning. She was at Nipissing University taking the business admin program. Her aspirations was to open a business one day.
After midnight on the 8th of August, we responded to what at that time was a missing person.
What did it tell you about Sarah that the family was so concerned so quickly?
Like, you know, this is a 20-year-old young woman. I think that there would be a lot of parents wouldn't be terribly alarmed or concerned about their daughter being a little late coming home. As soon as the boyfriend arrives shortly after 9 o'clock and Sarah isn't there, they're automatically concerned, and they start making calls, and shortly thereafter start searching. And this is the path. So this is the rear parking lot of Northgate Square, and this was a fairly significant path, well traveled. The challenge was, you know, by the time we got involved, it was quite dark. So the plan was to reassign this to our investigative support section first thing in the morning, and at that point put together a search team where we do a formal grid search.
Early the next morning, Sarah's uncle received a frantic call from his brother Brian.
Well, I guess he was up a good part of the night wondering where she was, because he phoned me at about 10 after 5 the Friday morning and said she hadn't come home. And I said, okay, I'll come over. He was outside when I got to his house, and we talked a little bit. He said nothing would make him happier than just to see her walking down the street. So I said, well, I'll go take a look, because there was a trail behind the mall, a shortcut to the direction of their home. You can't drive on it, it's a walking trail, so I parked on the street at the dead end and just kind of walked around through there.
For anyone in the area that would walk to the mall, that's how you would get there. So it was a fairly busy trail, I would consider. I remember going down there all the time. And then anyone who lived in that area would do the same thing.
As children growing up in the 80s, Kyle and Sarah would spend entire days outdoors.
Like, it was just get outside and come in when it's dark. Like, yeah, I mean, just I think it's very typical, especially in Northern Ontario, is it's just stay outside. Between my sister and all her friends and my friends, we were all in the same age group, so we spent a lot of time together outside for sure.
The one thing they did not do together, play sports.
She wasn't the athletic type, she didn't really enjoy that, so that was kind of my thing with sports.
Kyle was an avid golfer, away competing. He had no idea that one evening his sister hadn't returned home.
He was a very proficient golfer, and in fact was in Iroquois Falls the morning of the 8th of August at a Northern Ontario Golf Championship, and we had made arrangements to have him notified by the OPP and transported by the OPP back to North Bay so that he could be with his family.
I was playing golf, and yeah, it was I think Saturday morning. I was at the hotel and there was a knock on the door. I opened the door, there was 3 police officers dressed in uniform and one in like a detective suit and tie. And I just remember the gentleman in the suit and tie said, you know, there's an emergency in North Bay, we have to go right now.
So you hadn't spoken to your family?
No, I had no idea. No. like I said, when I opened the hotel room door, and then I was just, what did I do? You know, I didn't know what was going on. And like I said, back then there was no cell phones, so news didn't travel, so I had no idea.
No idea that back home in North Bay,
So I'm walking around through there, and different people, I guess, at work, going to work that morning at the mall. I think I startled a few of them because I came out of the bush and they were just walking on the trail.
that's when he made a discovery.
At 6:55, Eric finds Sarah's Walkman off the pathway in a wooded area, and he follows a bit of a trail.
And then I actually did see her.
Coming up, Sarah's uncle breaks the news to the family, and police start questioning everyone about their last known whereabouts. "20-year-old Sarah Whitehead went missing after a trip to the nearby mall. And hope is now gone she will return safely after her body was discovered." We return now to Caryn Lieberman with Innocence and Evil.
Now, I don't want to go back to my brothers and tell them I found her, so I had a buddy that lived in that little neighborhood, and so I figured, well, I'll go there and phone the police from there.
Sarah's uncle had found her body the morning after she'd gone missing, just off the path between the family home and Northgate Mall, where Sarah went to pick up a birthday gift for her mother.
One North Bay policeman showed up, so we drove back up to the dead-end street, and then I just walked up the trail, and I just pointed to where she was up over a rise. So he went up and checked, and came back down, and so he asked me if there was anybody that they could get a hold of to go and tell my brother and sister-in-law.
I can't imagine what that would have been like for you.
At least we found her. Not the way we wanted to, but we did.
I remember driving into the neighborhood, and just there was cars everywhere, all down the street. There was people everywhere, and I'm like, there's something not right here. And when I pulled up to my driveway, and I saw, you know, all my friends, family, I remember seeing my mom and dad, and sorry. And then my sister wasn't there. Sorry.
Sarah's younger brother, Kyle, who hadn't even known she'd gone missing, now learned she was dead.
I just remember asking my parents what happened, and my mom said we don't know. And I was just confused, and it wasn't until, you know, a little while after when they finally told me what happened, and I didn't know what to feel, and it was just the worst day of my life.
From what I understand, it was all hands on deck. Every police officer was trying to figure out, you know, how did this happen?
Yeah, I mean, this was little North Bay where nothing ever happens, so this was a big deal. So you can imagine, you know, every police officer was involved in this.
My day started with a meeting with Eric, obtaining a consent DNA sample from him, seizing his clothing, and then taking a statement regarding his involvement. Eric was Sarah's uncle, and he had found Sarah's body at the scene just before 7 a.m. On the morning of the 8th of August.
There was two lads that questioned me for a fair bit, And they took my DNA, and then they wanted somebody to go up and ID her at the hospital, so she had quite a gash on the side of her cheek, which I didn't see her head because it was kind of in the brush, so that part I didn't know about until I got there.
When did it become clear to you what exactly had happened to Sarah?
When I seen her, I guess, basically, there's always hope of, finding them, like, still living, but anyway, that's life sometimes.
Well, the family was devastated. Like, Eric was very upset. My first dealings with Eric, he had difficulty in providing a statement to the police. He certainly understood why we were obtaining a consent DNA sample from him and taking his clothing. Later that day, actually, it was Eric and myself that attended the morgue so that he could identify Sarah's body. The investigative team decided that was something that we didn't want to put Brian and Leona through.
Sarah's parents, Brian and Leona Whitehead, were well known and well connected in North Bay.
They were involved in a lot of things. My brother, baseball and hockey and curling, and that's how there were so many people involved in the family.
So I knew Brian. It was probably one of the most challenging interviews I've ever conducted in my policing career. He was devastated, and I recall standing in our investigative support section office afterwards and Brian hugging me after the interview was complete and just sobbing uncontrollably and giving him some assurances that we would find Sarah's killer and bring him to justice.
Her disappearance and the discovery of her body hit this close-knit community hard.
With every homicide, there's multiple victims. Like, people always think of the homicide victim. There's family, there's friends, there's co-workers, there's a community. This is not the type of crime that typically would happen in the city of North Bay.
A lot of people that may have not known us were affected because it's such a small town, right? So.
And because no one knew who did it.
It was just the question mark. No one had any answers. It was just a total mystery, yeah, for sure.
Two communities now waiting for answers. The family of Sarah Whitehead in North Bay, Ontario, and to the south, Larry Arnold's loved ones in Chatham. But they weren't the first victims, and they wouldn't be the last.
The search for evidence continues in the area where the body of 20-year-old Sarah Whitehead was discovered Friday.
It was determined by the pathologist that she had died from manual strangulation.
We discovered Sarah's shorts hidden underneath a rock, and that subsequent testing of those shorts reveals Sarah's DNA as well as an unknown male offender. There was 768 persons of interest that were identified and eventually eliminated.
We had sent a copy of our poster that we drafted up to every police agency, every correctional facility, every social service agency, penitentiary in Canada.
Whoever was wearing these clothes was the person responsible for murdering Sarah Whitehead.
Then finally one day you get a call.
We had received a call from Constable Chris Brown of the OPP.
Chris says, wow, this is a really violent sex offender that was living in our area in July of 1997. That was the hottest tip that we had received in months.
Police were called to this apartment building where they found a woman unconscious in the basement laundry room. She had been sexually assaulted and left for dead.
I didn't recognize my daughter. So when I went to her hospital bed, until I looked for birthmarks, I didn't even know it was her.
This is the man police arrested near the scene.
He told us that you tell your bosses this is about another homicide, and he mentioned a number of other occurrences that he was responsible for.
That's next time on Crime Beat. Join us for the conclusion of Innocence and Evil. I'm Anthony Robart. Thank you for joining us tonight on Crime Beat. Want more episodes of Crime Beat? Listen to the Crime Beat podcast now for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you find your favorite podcast. And for past episodes of Crime Beat, check out our YouTube page, globaltv.com, or download the Global Go app.